Okay, so get this. We're about to jump into the world of Navy SEALs, world champion athletes, and even a grizzly bear named Bart.
And the cool thing is, it's not just about like being physically strong or anything. It's all about the mental side of things, how we think, how we react.
Okay, you've definitely got my attention.
Yep.
So, how do we train our brains to be more like, say, a Navy SEAL? What's the secret code?
Well, our guide for this deep dive is Eric Potterat.
Okay.
He's this psychologist who's worked with some of the most intense high performers you can imagine. He started out in the Navy's SEER school,
SEER school? What is that?
that survival evasion resistance escape.
Hmm.
Basically, the training they put you through to prep for like being captured behind enemy lines.
Intense. Okay, I get it. Talk about a pressure cooker.
And Potterat didn't just observe this stuff, he went through it himself.
Oh, wow.
He said the stress they were measuring was like off the charts, some of the highest they'd ever seen.
Wow, I bet. So from SEER school, he moves on to, wait, did you say grizzly bears earlier?
Hold your horses, we'll get to Bart. So after SEER school, Potterat helps develop the first mental toughness program for, get this, Navy SEAL Buds training.
Wait, so he's shaping the mindset of the guys we see in all those action movies?
You got it. These are the elite warriors, and Potterat's helping build that mental edge.
That's amazing. But it seems like it would be so different to go from working with, like, SEALs to working with athletes, right?
That's where it gets even more interesting, because Potterat didn't stop there. He went on to work with top athletes like Lance Armstrong, Michael Phelps' Olympic teams, even the Red Bull Extreme Sports program.
So he's seen it all. Elite warriors, top athletes.
Mhm.
I have to know, what are the common threads? What did he learn about high performance from all these different fields?
So that's exactly what he lays out in Learned Excellence. What he realized is that being at the top of your game, no matter what you do, isn't about some natural talent you're born with.
Right.
It's about developing the right mental habits, the right mindset, and the best part, he actually gives you the tools to do it.
Okay, so where do we begin? How do we even start to change our mindset? What's step one?
It all starts with understanding this excellence is a choice, not a gift. And building that mindset, that's where we'll kick off our deep dive today.
Okay, so we all have the potential for excellence. It's not some magical gift. I like that. But how do we actually, like, make it happen in our own lives?
So it all comes down to mindset,
Yeah.
right? How we see the world, how we approach challenges. And Potterat uses this example that I think really brings it to life. Pickleball.
Pickleball. Is that like
That's the one. Like
Yeah.
tennis, but
Yeah. Smaller court, right.
Exactly. And everyone's playing it these days, which is why he uses it as an example.
Right.
You see this whole spectrum of mindsets out there on the pickleball court.
Oh, totally.
You got some people, they're there for the social aspect, get some exercise, have some laughs, maybe hit the ball over the net a few times.
That's me, 100%. I'm definitely not out there to, like, dominate the pickleball scene.
Right. But then you get the players who are all business.
Yeah.
Every shot is analyzed, they're in it to win it. Maybe even a little trash talk.
Oh, I've seen those guys at the park. So, same game, totally different experience based on, like you said, that underlying mindset.
Exactly. And that's what's so cool about this stuff. It applies to way more than just pickleball, right? It's about how we approach everything in life, challenges at work, relationships, you name it.
So how do we shift gears? How do we go from, like, casual pickleball player to someone who's really embracing challenges and striving for that excellence?
It starts with cultivating what's called a growth mindset. Have you heard of this?
Yeah, definitely. It's the idea that, like, we can always learn and grow. We're not stuck where we are.
You got it.
Hmm.
And a big part of that is embracing challenges. Even those moments when, we might not get it right the first time, we might even fail. But those are actually crucial for growth.
Oh, here comes the wisdom. Hit me with it.
It's like that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? Potterat would say those struggles, those moments we get pushed outside our comfort zone, that's where the real magic happens.
Okay, that makes sense. So how do we, like, actually do that? How do we develop that resilience, that grit?
Well, he tells this story that I think really illustrates this. It's about this guy, Derek Walker, who was a minor league baseball player. And he decides, get this, to try out for the SEALs.
Whoa, from baseball to SEAL training, that's quite the career
Talk
change.
about pushing your limits, right? And he actually makes it through Hell Week, which is supposed to be brutal.
Oh, I've heard about that.
But then ultimately, he doesn't get selected for the SEAL teams.
Oh, man, I bet that was tough.
Yeah, super disappointing. But here's where the grit comes in. Instead of giving up on his goals altogether, he takes that experience, that resilience he built, and channels it into something new. He gets his MBA, ends up having a super successful career in finance, even works for Nike for a while.
Wow, talk about a pivot. He took that SEAL mindset and ran with it, even though things didn't go exactly as planned. That's amazing.
And I think that's a really important point. It's not about achieving this one specific goal. It's about developing that mental toughness, that adaptability that will help you succeed no matter what life throws your way.
Oh, so how do we cultivate that? Is it all about like self-discipline, pushing ourselves harder, or is there more to it than that?
That's where it gets really interesting. Potterat argues that it's not just about individual effort, it's also about who you surround yourself with.
Yeah.
He says you need people in your life who are loyal, honest, knowledgeable, and challenging.
Okay, break that down for me. Who are these people and where do I find them?
Think of it like building a personal board of advisors. These are the people who are truly in your corner, no matter what. They're loyal. They're not afraid to tell you the truth, even when it's hard to hear. That's the honest part. But they're not just there to give you tough love. They also have the knowledge and experience to offer valuable insights. Think mentors, coaches, maybe even friends in your field.
Right, people who've been there, done that. But what about that last one, challenging?
That's about having people who aren't afraid to ask you the tough questions, to push you outside your comfort zone. They help you see your blind spots, the ones that will tell you when you're selling yourself short or when you need to step it up.
So being open to feedback, even when it stings a little. But how do we know who to listen to? Not everyone gives good advice, right?
Such a good point. And Potterat tells this hilarious story that he calls the barista test.
The barista test. Okay, now you gotta tell me more.
So one of Potterat's clients, this professional athlete, he's in a bit of a slump. He's feeling down on himself, doubting his abilities. And he goes to his usual coffee shop, and the barista there, who knows he's an athlete, starts offering unsolicited advice about his technique.
Oh no, I can already see where this is going.
Right. But the athlete's feeling vulnerable, and he kind of latches onto it and mentions it to his coaches later.
And the coaches are like, yeah, no.
Exactly. They help him see that while the barista meant well, he wasn't exactly coming from a place of, expertise.
So the barista test is about being picky about who we take advice from.
You got it. Especially when we're feeling down or desperate for a quick fix. It's about learning to filter that input, to seek guidance from the people who have actually achieved the things we're striving for.
That makes sense. So we've got the right people in our corner, we're open to feedback. Now, how do we actually start building those mental muscles? What are the practical skills that will help us perform at our best?
That's where the real fun begins. Potterat dives into specific techniques, and they're all illustrated with these awesome stories from his work. We're talking SEAL teams, Olympic athletes, you name it, he's got a story for it.
Okay, you've definitely got my attention. Lay it on me. What are some of these techniques? Okay, let's get practical. What are those techniques we can use to level up our mental game?
So Potterat lays out a whole bunch, but one that really stood out to me is this idea of staying in the circle.
Staying in the circle. Okay, I'm gonna need you to break that one down for me.
Okay, so picture this. You've got a circle drawn around you. Inside that circle are all the things you have direct control over. Your effort, your attitude, your reactions. Outside the circle. Everything else, stuff you can't control. The weather, what other people are thinking, the outcome of a game.
Gotcha. So staying in the circle means like focusing on what I can actually influence and not stressing about the stuff I can't change. Sounds good in theory, but like, what about when my internet crashes right before I have to give a big presentation? Staying in the circle feels kind of tough in those moments.
Totally. It definitely takes practice. But Potterat gives this great example of a Navy SEAL sniper who was dealing with some anger issues.
Oh, wow, I bet.
Yeah, and it was even like little everyday stuff that would set him off. He'd get angry at his son for spilling milk, things like that.
Okay, I mean, I've been there with the spilled milk.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite at SEAL level intensity, though.
Right. But here's a guy who's trained to handle these incredibly stressful situations, and he's losing it over spilled milk. So Potterat worked with him to create this little ritual. Every time he brushed his teeth, he'd look in the mirror and remind himself, spills happen, it's just milk, his son is learning, and his own reaction, that's what mattered most.
It's like he was pre-programming a calmer response, training his brain to stay in the circle even when those little everyday stressors popped up.
Okay, that's kind of brilliant. So what other tools are in this high-performance toolkit?
Well, you've probably heard about visualization.
Oh, yeah.
But Potterat takes it to a whole other level. He's not just talking about picturing yourself crossing the finish line. It's about engaging all your senses to create this total immersive experience.
Okay, I gotta be honest, I'm always a little skeptical about visualization. It feels a little, I don't know.
Little woo-woo.
Maybe, but I'm open to it. Give me some proof.
So he talks about Lynn Swann, the football player, right? He vividly visualized himself making that impossible game-winning catch in Super Bowl X. Okay, that's a classic visualization story.
And it's a classic for a reason. And it's not just some old school thing. He talks about Nathan Chen, the figure skater, who used visualization to come back from a totally disastrous short program at the Olympics.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I remember that. To win the gold? That's incredible.
Right. He had to mentally rehearse every single element of that program flawlessly before he could even step back onto the ice.
Wow. Okay, so visualization, check. But what about when things inevitably go wrong? Even when we prepared and visualized and all that good stuff, how do we stay in that high performance headspace when, life throws us a curveball?
That's where contingency planning comes in, which I know might sound a little strange.
Yeah.
Like, shouldn't we be focusing on everything going perfectly?
Right, positive vibes only.
Exactly. But Potterat argues that actually mentally rehearsing those what-if scenarios can really reduce anxiety. And it can actually help you perform better when those curveballs inevitably come your way.
So it's like instead of panicking when something unexpected happens, you've already mentally prepped for it, which frees up your brain to adapt and overcome.
Exactly. And again, it's not about being pessimistic or anything.
Yeah.
It's about being realistic
Mm.
and prepared. He tells this amazing story about a SEAL sniper. This is after the milk spilling incident. And he starts contingency planning for everything. Big stuff, small stuff. He even had a system in place for his family in case he was killed in action.
Wow, that's intense. I'm starting to see how these techniques, even if they seem a little extreme for everyday life, can be really powerful.
Right. And the great thing is you can adapt them to all kinds of situations.
Yeah.
Even things like, say, dealing with performance anxiety. Potterat tells this story about a professional wakeboarder he worked with.
Oh, cool. What was the story?
So this guy, he was letting his nerves get the best of him before competitions, right? Self-doubt, anxiety, all that fun stuff. So instead of just telling him to, don't worry, be confident, Potterat had him focus on his pre-performance routine, really dial it in. The exact sequence of actions he'd do every time to get in the zone.
Okay. Yeah, I've totally seen those athletes who have these very specific routines before a game or a race. Like if they don't tie their shoes in a certain order, their whole game is off.
Exactly. It's the same principle.
Yeah.
It's about anchoring yourself in those familiar actions, quieting all those mental distractions. Which actually leads us perfectly into another technique that I think is super useful for anyone, whether you're about to hit the wakeboard course or just trying to get through a busy day. Goal setting and segmentation.
Okay, breaking down big goals into smaller steps. Classic productivity tip. But how does that tie into high performance?
It's all about making those big, scary goals feel less daunting. Right, by breaking them down into smaller, more manageable chunks. You create this roadmap, a sense of progress. And then every time you hit one of those smaller milestones, boom, you're reinforcing that feeling of accomplishment, which keeps you motivated to keep going.
How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time?
Boom. Exactly. And along those same lines, one of the most powerful tools Potterat talks about is self-talk. Paying attention to that voice in your head, and more importantly, challenging the negative or limiting beliefs that can sabotage your performance.
Ugh, don't even get me started on that inner critic. That little voice can be brutal, especially when you're feeling stressed or insecure.
Totally. But here's the thing, it's not about silencing that voice altogether. Those thoughts, they're going to pop up. It's human nature. It's more about how you choose to respond to them and how you can reframe them. He tells this really interesting story about a firefighter who, after a near-miss experience, was dealing with a ton of fear and self-doubt.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that makes sense. Even if you know logically that you're well-trained and prepared, that doesn't always stop those emotional responses.
Exactly, and they can be really debilitating. So Potterat worked with him to identify those negative thought patterns, that I'm going to freeze up, I can't handle this kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and then replace them with more positive, evidence-based affirmations, like, I've trained for this, I can handle this, that kind of thing.
So it's about consciously choosing a different internal dialogue.
Exactly. Now imagine you're right in the middle of a high-pressure situation. Maybe those negative thoughts creep in, or you make a mistake that throws you off your game. Potterat has this really interesting technique called black boxing.
Black boxing. Okay, I have no idea what that means.
It's about learning to compartmentalize those negative thoughts or distractions. You're putting them in a box, so to speak, to be dealt with later. Not ignoring them completely, but just choosing not to let them derail you in the moment.
So it's like hitting the pause button on those thoughts, saying, okay, I see you, but I'll deal with you later. Right now, I need to focus.
Exactly. But, and this is important, he emphasizes that the unpacking part is crucial. He gives the example of the U.S. women's soccer team, right? Known for their amazing performance, but they also make it a point to debrief after every game, win or lose, talking openly about what went well, what could be improved, that kind of thing.
Creating that space for reflection and analysis, but not letting it take over in the heat of the moment, I dig it. What about like those physical symptoms of stress, when you can literally feel that anxiety bubbling up, like right before a big presentation or
You
something?
talking about that fight or flight response?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where something as basic as your breath can be super helpful.
Oh yeah, I've heard that. Deep breaths.
It is. But Potterat talks about this specific technique called breathing 4444.
44444. Breathing. Okay, gotta admit, I'm intrigued. What's the deal with all the fours?
So it refers to the pattern of the breath. Inhale for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4. You can even do 6 if that feels better, and you repeat that for 4 minutes 4 times a day.
Okay, so it's not just about like taking a few deep breaths, it's about that specific pattern of breathing that actually has physiological benefits.
Exactly. He gives a great example of a lawyer in Oregon who used this technique to overcome, get this, a full-blown panic attack right before this high-pressure trial.
Whoa, okay. I'm sold. Definitely adding breathing 4444 to my repertoire. But, you know, all this talk about SEALs and athletes, it's pretty inspiring and everything. But I gotta ask, I bet our listeners are wondering the same thing. How much of this is actually relevant to, like, the average person? You know, someone who's not necessarily training for the Olympics or anything, but just wants to show up as their best self in their everyday life, their work, their relationships.
That's the really cool thing about these principles. They're not just for, like, elite performers. They're universally applicable. And in fact, Potterat actually dedicates the last part of the book to showing how they translate to things like building a high-performing team or even raising resilient kids.
Okay, now those are topics I think we can all relate to. Let's start with teams. What are some of those key takeaways for creating that culture of excellence in a team environment?
He talks a lot about open communication and what he calls psychological safety. Basically creating that space where everyone feels comfortable sharing their ideas, even if they're different, even if they challenge the status quo.
It's about building that trust so people feel comfortable speaking up, even if they disagree.
You got it. And one of the ways he suggests doing this is through what he calls after-action reviews. Basically, after a project, an event, whatever, you take the time to debrief what went well, what could be improved. But you do it without placing blame or making it personal.
Oh, I like that. It's like that debrief that the soccer team does, but applied to like a work setting.
Exactly. And he talks about the benefit of having a designated devil's advocate in meetings. Someone whose job it is to poke holes in arguments, challenge assumptions, really make sure all sides of an issue are considered.
You know, I've actually been in meetings where that dynamic has been super helpful. Having that person who's willing to play devil's advocate, not to be difficult or anything, but to make sure everyone's really thinking critically.
Right. It helps prevent what's called groupthink, which can stifle creativity. And he gives this great example of a team at Lincoln Financial. They really embraced these principles, especially during all the uncertainty of the COVID pandemic. Their leader, Bob Rafe, he made a point of encouraging open communication, focusing on what they could control, and creating this culture where it was okay to make mistakes, as long as they learned from them.
It sounds like they built this incredible culture of resilience, which, let's be honest, is such an essential skill these days.
Okay, I want to make sure we have time to touch on families as well, because I know a lot of our listeners are probably thinking, okay, all this is great, but how do I raise kids who are equipped to thrive in this world?
It's such an important question. And Potterat, he really emphasizes the importance of encouraging, and this might sound a little counterintuitive, but encouraging micro failures in kids.
Micro failures. So like letting them mess up a little.
Exactly. Resisting that urge to shield them from every challenge or disappointment, instead letting them stumble a bit. Let them experience those setbacks, and then, crucially, help them learn how to bounce back.
So it's about teaching them that it's okay to fail, that it's actually like a necessary part of learning and growing.
Yes. And it's about asking those open-ended questions that spark their curiosity, that encourage them to find their own answers, rather than just handing them solutions all the time. I love that. It's about cultivating that growth mindset from a young age. But, you know, it's one thing to like talk the talk, but ultimately I think the most powerful lessons we teach our kids are the ones we model for them.
100%. And Potterat comes back to that idea throughout the book. He reminds us that if we want our kids to be resilient, adaptable, if we want them to embrace those challenges, then we have to embody those qualities ourselves.
It's that whole walk the walk thing, right? Actions speak louder than words and all that. Well, this has been such a fascinating deep dive, so much to think about. If you had to distill it down, what would you say is the biggest takeaway from Learned Excellence?
It's that excellence in every area of life isn't about some, like, predetermined destiny. It's
Yeah.
not about some magical talent you're born with or without. It's a skill. And like any skill, it can be learned, it can be developed, and that's what's so exciting.
We all have that potential within us. It's about putting in the work, cultivating the right mindset, and using those tools and techniques that we've been talking about today. And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about embracing the journey, learning from those inevitable setbacks, and always striving to be a little bit better than we were yesterday.
He leaves us with this thought. Sometimes the people who achieve the most, the ones who reach those highest levels of performance, they're often the ones who've also failed the most. It's those failures, those moments where we fall short that teach us the most valuable lessons.
So if you're feeling inspired to level up your own mental game, pick one thing from this deep dive, just one. Maybe it's that breathing 4-4-4-4 technique, maybe it's the staying in the circle concept, whatever resonates with you, and commit to trying it out.
Start small, be consistent, and remember, excellence. It's not a destination, it's a journey. And we're all in this together.
And that's a wrap on another deep dive.